Go there. Is this working? We see the map. It's working. Alright, so I'm making this little video just to talk about some of the issues I had trying to set up my trim and actually understanding it. And so I'm gonna start by just going straight into the cockpit. We'll set everything here before we go. Yeah, that looks good. So this is the same mission. If you watched my first flight video, it's the same mission I used for the first flight. Haven't changed anything to it. I'm just using it to show what the helicopter does. So if you did watch that first video, you probably noticed that I tried using the trimmer at one point in my flight and it didn't do anything. That has to do with how they sort of refer to the trimmer controls and the control bindings. So we'll go have a look at that after we hit fly here. So I'm on the ground, not moving. So we're just going to go to adjust controls, and I want to sort of show you two buttons that I got confused, which are this one, force trim interrupt, and this other one, which is trimmer reset. Trimmer reset is the one I had set, and of course if we look here, I think at pilot cyclic, you actually have this and this on the thing, and one is called interrupt and the other one is called reset. And then let's have a little bit more fun with that and go back to the stick itself. And when I press this button, you can see it says trim rel, and in Casmo's video he talks about the trim release. And then again, if we go to our adjust control, it's not called trim release, it's called trim interrupt. So you can imagine why first of all I had a whole lot of trouble figuring out, do I put it on this, do I put it on that? So that could be something for Polychop and ED to maybe make a bit clearer. But I sort of figured out that the interrupt button, this one, is when you actually want to set your trim. And the trimmer reset, it's something that of course in DCS we have for a lot of helicopters when we want to remove the trim and set everything back to center. Let's say before you land, it's a good thing to do that. That's where you'll do it with. So what I did is I put my button 20, which is my big red button on top of my joystick, as my trimmer, because that's often what I use for helicopters. And then I use the modifier, which is like my pinky button, with the same button to remove it. So to me it makes it pretty simple. So I wanted to start with that. But then I'll get to show you in the cockpit what other problem I ran into after that was done. So let's set up the controls there. We can see them up top here. If I move, let's say top left there, and I press the trimmer, you see that the gray thing actually moved there. I'll put it against a black background there. You see where it moved, and if I click the trimmer, the reset trimmer thing with my pinky plus the big button, it comes back to center. So normally, let's say you're flying forward and you're moving the stick a little bit to the left and you're tired, you press the trimmer, it'll go there, and then you release the stick and it's still there, so you can fly the helicopter fairly stable without feeling, let's say, your right hand very tired because you're constantly pushing like that on the stick. So it's pretty useful for that. Now, one of the first issues I'm going to illustrate in flight is what happened once I had figured out which button does what, and I had the impression it wasn't working at all. So let's try it, and then you'll see why it wasn't working. So I'll reset it for now. We'll take off. Okay, so now let's say I want to head in that direction there, somewhere where's the end of the runway. I'm going to push my stick forward, give it a little bit of collective. So the cyclic is pretty far forward and we're fairly stable, so I'm going to hit my trim. And you see, if I release the stick, my helicopter goes wildly up in the air like that. And you might wonder, like, isn't it supposed to stay in that position there? Yes, it is supposed to. But what happens is that by default now, the force feedback option has been checked. And of course, 90% of us don't have a force feedback joystick. On a force feedback joystick, the motors would probably leave your joystick there. But when I leave, you know, when I press the trimmer and I release my stick, it's not going to stay there. It's going to return to center, and that's what it does. And so it's very, very confusing. So let's eliminate that problem first of all. I should say second of all, since we've eliminated the problem of figuring out which button does what. So to do that, I have to exit here. We'll go to the main menu. We go to our options. We have to go to the miscellaneous. And then in here, we're going to remove force feedback. This is turned on by default. I hope they fix that in the next patches. But anyways, make sure you have that turned off if you don't have a force feedback stick. If you're lucky enough to have a force feedback stick that will stay in position, you can leave it on. But for me, I don't. So figured I'd mention that. Now the other thing in the special category, if you go here, and of course Casmo had talked about the force feedback thing. Thank you for letting me know about that. And he also shows in his trimmer video the difference between instant, fade in, central. So I found that the fade in, fade out, it's true that it makes things a little bit smoother. So I'll show how it works once we're back in the cockpit. So I'm going to go back to my mission. Test flight number 1. And so we can just go fly. So what you'll see this time, I'm going to try to reproduce the same thing I did in the last flight. You'll see that when I release my stick after pressing the trimmer, the helicopter will just keep flying in the same direction. And that's probably what most people want when they hit the trimmer. If your arm is tired or something, you don't want to keep pushing on the stick all the time. So let's say I turn left like that and I head towards the end of the runway there. I'll put my control display there. You can see I'm pushing pretty far forward on the stick, and now I feel like I'm fairly stable, so I'm going to hit trimmer. And now if I let go of the stick, I should have done it a bit quicker, but it sort of keeps going. And you can always go trim and retrim a few times until you're happy with it. But now I've sort of released the stick and I'm not touching my stick anymore. I'm just using my pedals, and it stays where it's supposed to. Even though like my joystick itself is centered, it stays where I trimmed it. And so that makes flying a little bit easier. You don't have to hold the stick pushing forward like that. Now let's say you want to land, you'll want to reset that. So if I hit reset, you see it's going to go like that. Woo! But that would allow me, if I wanted to land in a clearing here, to actually have controls that will be more or less close to the center of it. So let's see if I can do that here. Land at that clearing. Now the main difference between, let's say if you choose instant or the fade in, fade out, will be that when you press your trimmer button, the stick, which would normally continue the movement, it'll be like a smoother transition. So I think it's nice that they gave us that smoother transition. You can see now I've landed. Wasn't too hard because everything had been set back to center. So those were the main things I had difficulty setting up when I tried to set my trimmer with this helicopter. Once it's done though, it really works very well. But since I'm guessing like a majority of people probably don't have the force feedback stick, tick off that option in the miscellaneous for force feedback. Otherwise you're going to get like me, like you're going to press the trimmer button and then when you release the stick the nose is going to go up wildly. Now it does give you a little bit of movement. Let's say I reset it again. If I push forward like that, okay, I'm pushed very far forward. If I trim and I leave my stick there, of course it's going to push the nose down. So even though I put the fade in, it still pushes a lot. So you have to remember to let go of the stick a little bit when you trim it. So let's do it again. I'm centered. I'm going to move forward. And then I'm going to trim and slowly I'll bring it back to center. You see? Almost no difficulty in the transition there because of that fading. So I kind of like that option. It's pretty nice. And if I reset it again, when I reset, I had pushed the stick manually forward so that it doesn't go wildly nose up. And it seems to make a little bit more sense now. So again, just really important things to know when you're trying to set up your trimmer in this helicopter. It's not the first helicopter I fly in DCS. Don't expect your trimmer to do the same thing as the KA-50. The KA-50 basically has a bunch of electronic controls that once you trim it, it'll keep going in that direction forever. That's one of the things that this won't do. Like if I trim it right now, if I let go of the stick, you can see that eventually, because I was at slow speed, I would lose control and my helicopter would probably crash. So it's not one of those automatic things like the KA-50 where it would keep you going in that direction forever because it's all controlled by a computer. This is just in real life what it does is the stick will stay in the position that you positioned it. And you know what they say about helicopters? There's this 3-second rule. If you don't give any input for 3 seconds, you're probably going to crash. Well, if you're trimmed nicely, you probably won't crash after 3 seconds, but you still have to give, you see the stick moving there? You still have to give those little inputs here and there just to keep it steady. So that was what I wanted to show about the trimmer. Hope you enjoyed.